everybody. This is for my U.S. History 2 students. This is we're continuing the conversation on World War I, looking at Concept 2, discussing American attitudes and actions, and showing how such attitudes and actions influenced the decision to go to war, basically. From the outbreak of World War I, American public opinion predominantly favored the Allies. It matters little how much this opinion was due to Allied propaganda, since both sides issued propaganda. And we'll be talking about American propaganda directed towards its citizens in the next concept. The Allies had an advantage in issuing propaganda, speaking the same language, English, as the Americans, and having the same mode of thought, historically and culturally. The Allies controlled the most important avenues of communication, as they had access to American news and journals, and could command the services of many intellectuals and leaders of American society. Ties of language and literature, law and custom bound America to the British Empire in hundreds of ways. War with Britain would appear immoral to many Americans. With Germany and her allies, American relations were okay, but they weren't cordial. In 1910, however, the United States had a population of 92 million, with 32 million being hyphenated Americans, first or second generation immigrants who had retained ties to their old countries. Among the more than 13 million from the countries at war, by far the largest group were the 8 million German Americans and the 4 million Irish Americans who harbored deep-rooted enmity, hatred towards the British Empire. These groups instinctively they instinctively leaned towards the Central Powers, Germany and its allies, in other words. Since the Spanish-American War, there had grown up in America a feeling that German government was militaristic, hostile to democracy, and unfriendly to the United States. This seemed particularly true after they realized, after the release, of the Zimmermann telegraph. On January 31st, 1917, Germany announced it would resume unrestricted submarine warfare. Neutral ships, armed or unarmed, sailing into a German war zone could be attacked without warning. Consequently, Wilson broke off diplomatic relations with Germany on February 3rd. The German foreign minister, Alfred Zimmermann, foresaw that war with the United States was inevitable. And he sent a telegraph instructing his ambassador in Mexico to offer an alliance and financial aid to Mexico in case of war between the United States and Germany. In return for diversionary action against the United States, Mexico would receive its lost territory in Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona, according to Zimmermann. The Zimmermann note was intercepted by the British Secret Service and held onto until the most advantageous moment in order to push Wilson over to the brink into war with Germany. Wilson's severing of diplomatic relations in Germany seemed to present that moment. The contents of the note of the Zimmermann telegraph constitutes one of the most important factors in leading Wilson to declare war on Germany. On March 1st, the Zimmermann note was released to the public, which became electrified by its contents. People were pretty outraged by this. Although it was contingent on war with the United States, it saw it as an aggressive attempt. But thinking about it, there was no... Basically what the letter was asking was for Mexico to antagonize the United States and or go to war with the United States, which Mexico at this time was in no way position of doing either. action. And so this Zimmerman telegram was, although it enraged a lot of Americans, it really had no teeth behind it. There was no way Mexico could assist Germany. As already mentioned, American opinion was further aroused by Germany's persistence in the U-boat policy, submarines, which most Americans regarded as a violation of international law and morality. Finally, at the outset of the war, Germany had made a serious blunder when it invaded Belgium. According to the treaty signed by most European powers, Belgium neutrality was guaranteed in 1839. The German Chancellor justified Germany's actions by calling the treaty, quote, a scrap of paper. The same mistake was compounded when the same official justified the German invasion of Belgium in Reichstag, saying, "We are now on the defensive. Necessity knows no law. We shall try to make good the wrong we have thus committed as soon as we shall have reached our military goal. Those who, like ourselves, are fighting for the highest aim can only think of one thing, that they must smash their way through." But such a frank acknowledgement that it acts defied international law, Germany put itself in the morally wrong as a breaker of treaties and a position that lost support and sympathy all over the world. Right? Basically, they're saying they're going to do whatever it takes to put themselves on top in the world. The structure of the Treaty of Versailles, as we shall later see, rested in large part on the guilt of Germany, the perceived guilt of Germany. When the treaty was first written, scholars and laymen alike in the Allied nations sincerely believed Germany was completely responsible for the war. But in retrospect, like in any war, there was plenty of blame to go around on all sides. But the consequences of holding Germany accountable were incredibly consequential. Basically what it's going to lead to is the incredibly disastrous conflict popularly known as World War II. The United States also developed an economic stake in the war. Even before 1914, a large part of American trade had been with the Allied nations. During the war, trade with Germany became non-existent, while trade with Great Britain and France mounted impressively. This increase in our foreign trade was in full swing by the middle of 1915 and rescued the United States from a commercial depression that had lasted a year. Thus, within a year after the outbreak of the war, the whole fabric of American economic life was so closely interwoven with the economy of the Allies that any rupture would have been ruinous. Between 1914 and 1916, our total trade with Allied countries went from $825 million to $3.2 billion. A substantial increase. Germany never denied the legality of this trade, but it did protest bitterly that its one-sided nature violated the spirit of neutrality, and it did. If you're going to be, the United States declared itself neutral in the conflict when war breaks out in Europe in 1914, and so it is under the obligation of the neutral nation to either not trade with anybody or to trade evenly to some degree with all belligerents. As the war progressed, credit became a major problem for belligerents, as they could not buy American goods without it. By the time the United States entered the war, over $2.3 billion had been lent by American public to the Allied governments, as opposed to only $27 million to Central Powers. By the end of the war, American loans totaled $7 billion. That the American economic stake in an Allied victory had been inclined some people toward war is possible, but the financial community as a whole preferred American neutrality, which afforded Wall Street all the profits of war without corresponding sacrifices and taxation. So there's a debate how much the United States was pushed towards war for economic reasons. That goes back and forth. But it's safe to say that it did have a substantial influence. American policymakers just could not see allies being overwhelmed by the Central Powers. The economy is too interwoven, and so it would face probably an economic depression and or a collapse if that scenario had happened. So that'll be it for Concept 2. Concept 3 will be looking at the propaganda that was imposed within the United States to get Americans on board with this war, which was quite a feat. It was pretty problematic to get the Americans, to get the average American in support of this war. All right, email me if you have any questions. I'll talk to you guys later.